as odd as that may seem. So they cover their mouths, and they cover their mouths with their hands, or it's really kind of interesting if you're talking to somebody who's Japanese and she starts to laugh, she'll cover her mouth. Of course, as Americans, we're thinking, wow, she must not really like her teeth, but the reality is it's part of her culture that women don't show emotion. And of course, in the United States, well, in Japan, they read eyes instead of mouths. In the United States, we read mouths, which is kind of interesting. But that's in Japan. In the United States, the dominant culture, which is primarily the white culture, I guess, the European culture, admires direct eye contact and equates it with honesty. Now, this is not true in all other cultures. Strange, well, it's not that strange. Native cultures, a lot of native cultures, you'll see this, especially in young children. They will not make eye contact. And of course, teachers sometimes think that the kid is not paying attention or they don't care. But the reality is, it's just part of their culture. So some native kids have trouble in school, especially elementary school and high school, because they don't make direct eye contact. There are other cultures around the world where they consider it rude to make direct eye contact. Nigeria is one of them. Puerto Rico, strangely enough, which is a Spanish country, or it's a protectorate of the United States. It has some really odd status. We're not exactly sure who they are and what's going on with them. Anyway, Thailand is another country where you don't make direct eye contact. And Japan, the Japanese are really interesting. So the women cover their mouths and nobody makes direct eye contact. And they consider it rude. So if you're wandering around, you're trying to talk to somebody, what you need to do is walk beside them so that you're not looking face to face. Then everything is okay. But if you try to make direct eye contact with the Japanese, they'll look away. And Americans read that sometimes as them lying to us. Of course, Pearl Harbor occurred. There's a lot of history between us and the Japanese. Anyway, Arab countries, their eye contact is so direct that we would, even in the United States, we consider it rude. But if you've ever been around an Arab, I'll tell you what, it's weird. It's weird. Not only that, but they want to get close enough to you to smell your breath. That's what they'll tell you that. They won't believe you unless you're that close. So they consider, the distance that Americans put between them and other people, the personal space they have. They consider that Americans trying to lie to them. It's just it's the oddest thing in the world. Evidently you've been around Arabs, and yeah, the eye contact is painful almost. Oh my God. They're staring you down or something. It's really kind of bizarre. Anyway, so the whole world isn't like Salem, Arizona, as it turns out. I know that's a shock to just about everybody. So who did you come in contact with?
Maybe twice. One happened overseas. I was going on the ferry to travel through London, and
right.
There was a couple, one with a veil. I just took one glance, and the husband or the partner just looked at me and just wouldn't break that contact.
Exactly.
It was like trying to say I'm sorry or something. I was just like looking, and then I just kind of like look around.
We were at the Statue of Liberty, and there was a Sikh. A Sikh. If you know who those guys are. They're not Arabs, they're Indians. They're from India. They're from the Punjab. They wear turbans. They never cut their hair. They always carry a knife. They're really tall people. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, they're Sikhs. S-I-K-H. He, for some reason, this guy started looking at my wife, and she looked back. Of course, she's an officer in the United States Air Force, so, she's used to staring people down. Anyway, he started following her. I thought he was attracted to her, but maybe not. I don't know. It was really kind of weird. But he followed, and we were on the Eiffel Tower. Well, the Eiffel Tower is, it's tall and skinny, and you really can't get away from people. It's that kind of a situation. So he started following her, and I noticed it, and I told her that this guy was following her, and I saw the knife. He was carrying a knife right here. It's on his belt. So we're trying to get away from this guy, or she's trying to get away from him. I'm trying to get between the two of them so that he won't be able to get to her. Well, geez, the guy must have weighed 250 pounds. He was 6'5". He was huge. And every time I got in front of him, he just moved me aside. He just kind of grabbed a hold of my shoulder and pushed me aside. And here I am, I'm bouncing off of the superstructure of the Eiffel Tower. But finally I got in front of him and slowed down, and I was on a stairway, and he couldn't do anything with me except push me down. And I just kind of slowed down, and the French people behind him were just screaming because I was going so slow. But my wife got away. Anyway, really weird stuff. Anyway, Sikhs. One aspect of nonverbal communication that doesn't register with most people is personal space. And of course, we all maintain personal space. If you are from one of the English countries, or if you're from Canada or Australia, or England or the United States, and have English ancestry, the probability is that you maintain a lot of personal space. It's kind of funny watching Sarah and I talk to each other, because Sarah's from Canada and I'm from, I'm a Hoosier from Indiana. And we maintain a lot of personal space. So here we are, we're talking to each other, and we'll start out relatively close, and then slowly we're backing away from one another until we're screaming at each other across the room. Watch sometime. Try to get close to Sarah and talk to her. Try it.
I noticed like when a lot of the naval officers are like that, because the ships and everything's really close.
Right.
They'll talk to you like this, and
Right.
you're trying to
I don't want to smell your breath. Thank you very much. Okay. So the individuals that maintain the most personal space, North Americans, of course, Canadians, and people from the United States. Northern Europeans, that's the Vikings, that's the people in Scandinavia, the English. Asians maintain a lot of personal space if they can. Remember, these are collectivist people, and they live in very crowded conditions. So they will maintain personal space if they can. But if they can't, they don't mind just banging right up against you, as strange as that may seem. Pakistanis maintain a lot of personal space. As compared to other Arabic-speaking people, Pakistanis do maintain a lot more personal space. And most Native American groups maintain some degree of personal space. But there are people that don't. Go to France sometime. The French, my God, if they want to talk to you, they get right up against you so that they can touch you. They want to touch you while they're talking. It's really interesting. The British, the English, they're so far apart they couldn't touch each other if everybody stuck their arms out. But the French are the very opposite. I mean, they'll get right up next to you and start talking to you, right into your face, kind of like the naval officers. People from France, people from Southern Europe, people from the Middle East, and people from South America. These are all touchers. These people are touchers. So when they talk to you, they need to touch you. As odd as that may seem. There are some gestures that you need to be careful of. In the United States, means peace, means two, means victory. But if you do it backwards, like this, it means something totally different in English-speaking countries. It's usually done with a gesture. Yeah, this is okay, but this is not okay. Especially if you go like that. It means up yours is what it means. Okay, well, anyway, it's an obscene gesture, okay? But only in English-speaking, or in England and Canada sometimes, depending on what part of Canada they come from. The people that live on the eastern, the people who live around Montreal and Toronto, they're more English than the people out west. People out west, what happened was, okay, how did Canada get settled? Canada started out as a French colony, and then they lost the French lost the French and Indian War, and so the British took over, and then people started immigrating into Canada, and most of those people were English, were Englishmen. So they had this chunk of French people around Toronto and Montreal, and then all the rest of Canada started to fill in with the English. Well, then they opened up immigration. And when they opened up immigration, they got Germans, they got Ukrainians, they got a bunch of people that weren't English. So in the West, around Winnipeg and Saskatchewan and British Columbia, you started getting people that weren't English. So the people in the West aren't nearly as English as the people in the East. Does that make sense? Okay. Be careful who you tell that to, because they claim that they're all the same, but they ain't the same at all. I had a friend who was, his name was Andy Zubinski, and he was from Canada, but his family had he was a second generation immigrant from the Ukraine. So there's a big chunk of Saskatchewan that is Ukrainian. There's a lot of Ukrainians there. Does all this make sense? Okay, we think of Canadians as all exactly the same, but the reality is they ain't any more the same than, people in the United States. If you go to some villages in Indiana or Kansas or Iowa, it's a German town, or it's a Swedish town, or it's, it was settled by Swedes, or it was settled by Germans or whatever, or French. That kind of stuff happens. Not everybody's English. A lot of people, and sometimes you can tell by what religion they practice. If they're Lutheran, they're probably Scandinavian. They're probably, from Sweden or Norway or someplace. And the Norwegians have a funny way of swearing. Oofda. I'm not going to teach you any swear words in Norwegian. Thumbs up has only positive connotations in much of the world, but in the Middle East, Italy, and Greece, it means up yours, and is, of course, undesirable. So here we have the victory sign, which is a victory sign as long as it's this way, but if you turn it around, you got a problem. Okay, there you go. Be careful who you do that to. Now, people in the United States, they won't even notice whether you do this or that. Okay, but in England or in Australia, you got a problem. Okay, and the same thing with thumbs up. You have to be really careful who you're talking to. In the United States, making a circle with your index finger and thumb means A-OK. But in France, Venezuela, Turkey, and Brazil, it means zero or worthless. So be careful. In Japan, it means money. So if you go like this to somebody from Japan, it means I'm going to pay you, or you're going to pay me, or money's going to be transferring between the two of us. In some countries, this has to do with the female genitalia. So be very, very careful as to what you do. In some Arab countries, if you do this, it's not considered correct. So be careful. Okay. Very common sign in the United States, but not in other countries.
You always see our U.S. president doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're good. Yeah. I've got some presidents that made the wrong symbols in the wrong place. Okay, I've got some examples. The summoning gesture in the United States means death in Japan or Singapore. It's death. It is a person, and this is how they tell you to come here, come on. Okay, it's time to go.
So when Trump is doing this all the time, is he like expressing quotation or?
No, he's saying everything's great. That's his symbol. Yeah, he's big on the A-OK symbol, which is A-OK in the United States, but not in other places. In most of the world, left-handed people are tolerated for their backward use of hands, and no one cares. No one cares in the United States whether you're left-handed or right-handed. In the Middle East, India, Sri Lanka, and Africa, the use of the left hand for anything isn't tolerated because it is the hand that you wipe yourself with. So never try to shake hands with somebody from someplace else left-handed. Don't do it. They will be grossly insulted. Something else, the bottom of the feet in some cultures, it's very insulting. So if you're sitting down, don't show anybody the bottoms of your feet, even if it's your shoe. Even if you do have shoes on, don't show them the bottom of your feet, as odd as that sounds. Hand gestures that are universally recognized in select cultures are referred to as emblems. So the middle finger, of course, is an emblem in the United States, as it's an obscene gesture. We would think of this as a universal gesture. It's an emblem in the United States, but in other places, of course, it has different meanings. Emblems are not universal, and this can sometimes lead to trouble. This is George H.W. Bush. He got in trouble. He was in Australia, and he flashed this symbol. This is him doing it. Him thinking, of course, it means victory. You know, we're one. And of course, what he was actually saying was, well, it's just like flashing the bird to everybody in Australia. I know. And nobody told him, I guess. It's evidently, this happens to the Bushes. It seems to happen to the two Bushes more than anybody else. Anyway, he gave everybody in Australia the finger, as odd as that may seem. In Norway in 2005, George W. Bush was greeting a crowd of well-wishers when someone in the audience yelled, Texas. Well, in Texas, if you go like this, it means hook 'em horns. And it's just the symbol that they use in Texas. So Texans go like this a lot. Or like this. You know, it's one of those kind of deals. But in Norway, this gesture means it's a sign of the devil. So what he was flashing the sign of the devil to everybody, which seems a little odd to do. Got in a lot of trouble, as it turned out. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong, lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming conflicting impressions. First impressions become perhaps the most important key in information integration, and this is kind of dangerous, I guess. So you need to put your best foot forward, especially the first time you meet somebody. You need to put your best foot forward. It doesn't take much to develop an idea about someone that is difficult to change. When someone makes meaningful conclusions about another person's personality based on a brief encounter, it is called thin slicing. Most of us have probably a fairly positive attitude about the Pope, Pope Francis. He's a lot more outgoing than the guy that is dying. Evidently, the other Pope that stepped down is sick, and it looks like he's not going to make it, which is kind of interesting. But this Pope, of course, was a lot more pleasant, smiled all the time. You know, all the other popes, you hardly ever saw them smile. And here's Pope Francis, and he goes around, and a kid stole his beanie, or whatever that thing is, off his head. And he thought it was the funniest thing in the world, and he gave the kid a kiss and whatnot. And he was serving Mass, and a little baby came up, a 2 or 3 year old came up, and Pope Francis is just hooting because he's having such a good time with this little kid, and he's fun. Anyway, so Pope Francis, despite the fact we have no clue who this guy is, thin slicing, we have positive attitudes or positive ideas about him. At this point, and potentially that's what happened in the last election. Nobody really knew who Trump was. They liked the idea that he said what he thought. And for that reason, they voted for him. A lot of it may have had to do with thin slicing. Trump was an actor. No, he was a reality star, I guess. Okay. So nobody really knew who he was. And then we got a small taste of who he was during the election, and now, of course, we've got him for 4 years, and some people are really upset about what's going on. At the same time, Hillary Clinton had been around forever. She'd been around since Bill. And of course, people had ideas about who she was. So they weren't really doing the thin slicing thing. But there are a lot of people that really didn't know who Donald Trump was. And potentially, we still don't know who he is. Even in the face of new and conflicting information that should prompt us to reconsider, most people will stick to their initial judgment, and this is known as belief perseverance. And this is really strong. The belief perseverance is very strong. So the first time you meet somebody, if you don't like them, it's going to be really hard for them to convince you that they're okay. Research shows that belief perseverance won't allow jurors to ignore inadmissible evidence. If you, of course, when you start listening to a case, you actually make a decision almost immediately as to whether the individual is guilty or not guilty. You will look at them and you will determine whether you think that they're guilty or not guilty. So you'll start, it's a balance. So as you're accumulating information, despite the fact that some of the information may exonerate the individual, you're looking for information that will convict the individual. So, and that's usually the way jurors do things. And this is known as belief perseverance. Belief perseverance also explains why scientists have a hard time discounting fabricated published data. So if anything is published, even in psychology, we believe it because there are people that swear by research. Some research is crap, okay? Sometimes it's wrong, and you can take that one to the bank. Just because it appeared in a refereed journal doesn't mean that it's good research. Sometimes they're making value judgments when they shouldn't be. They're making conclusions, taking conclusions from not enough evidence. And that's one of the reasons why I try to, we do these article critiques. I want you to read articles. I want you to look at them and see if you think that there were enough subjects in their research. If the subjects were represented the entire population of the earth. That's the kind of stuff I want you guys to look at. I want you to understand that sometimes when you do research on college students, that doesn't represent all the 70-year-olds out there and all the 12-year-olds out there, because it only represents drunk 20-year-olds, potentially, or whatever. I don't know. Not all college students are drunk. Not all of them.
What if, like, say, somebody's applying for a job and they have this belief, perseverance about you through hearsay? Is it still hard to change that person's idea?
Almost impossible.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So it's the first impression you get.
So it's like first impression, but it can also be kind of first impression racial, or not racial.
Well, remember, it's a scale, and we're accumulating information. If we have a negative idea about this person, we're going to discount all the positive information we get about them, and we're going to take all the negative information, and we're going to add it to what we believe. So the only thing we're really hearing or remembering is the negative stuff. If it's positive, it's exactly the other way. This is one of the reasons why, if you have a very attractive individual, we think positive things about attractive people. So despite the fact that this person may be the biggest jackass in the world, we have a hard time discounting the fact that our first impression was the fact that we were attracted to their attractiveness. As insane as that may seem. Does all that make sense? It's one of the reasons why we think that cheerleaders have the best time, and the captain of the football team is the greatest guy in the whole wide world. He may be the biggest jerk in the whole wide world, but we don't recognize it. When he does something, we think it's funny. Oh, he burned down the barn. That's so funny. That's so him, isn't it? Yeah, he's so cool. Is all this true? Yeah, I know. It's irritating. Being a short little ugly guy, man, I can't catch a break, Anyway, belief perseverance also explains why, we already talked about that. People find inconsistent thoughts uncomfortable and unpleasant. Thus we go with our initial thoughts, and because it takes less effort. So we don't want to keep thinking about this stuff. So we have an idea. I've got an idea about Edison, and so I'm going to whatever my initial idea is, I'm going to just build on that initial idea, so that I'm not accumulating new information. It's just too much work to keep accumulating information from all of my students. So I have all these, luckily for you guys, I have positive ideas about all my students. I love all my students. I keep telling you guys that. The truth is, I really do. And for that reason, you're going to have to do something really bad for it to even register with me. You know, I just have really positive feelings about you guys. So sorry about that. You're all winners in my book. In which case, I will be willing to write anybody a letter of recommendation. And usually have the same ideas about people. I've got good news. I don't know if I told you about the kid from Bangladesh. They shipped him back to Bangladesh because his visa ran out. He was in the United States. He's one of my students at Ashford. He's trying to get into graduate school, and he missed last year. But he's been accepted at 2 different schools at this point, so he gets to make a decision as to which school he wants to go to. They're giving him a stipend, so he's going to be able to come to the United States. The question is, can he get to the United States? Because he has to fly all the way from Bangladesh to the United States, and he hates flying. So this ought to be interesting. Oh man! But he does have a TA position, and he's going to be taking graduate classes either in quantitative psychology, like that's Sarah's area of expertise, or Dr. Wolf. Or IO psychology, which we don't even talk about, but hot dog, he gets to come back to the United States. So we'll see what happens. Good news, so that's good news. One of my students, I wrote him a letter of recommendation. I'm sure it wasn't my letter that did it, but at least it didn't hurt. Let's assume it didn't hurt since he's actually coming back to the United States. We can use first impressions and nonverbal communication to our own advantage. Public speaking, if we make a strong opening, and they tell you to tell a joke for first, when you first start a speech, you need to make a strong opening. The stronger the opening, it really doesn't matter what the rest of it is. As long as it's a strong opening, you're golden. In a job interview, they're going to be reading you. There's a lot of nonverbal communication, so you need to dress well. You need to make eye contact because that means that you're bold. Your body posture needs to have positive. You need to have positive body posture. So you need to stand up, sit up straight, or stand up straight. Sit square in your chair. Put both feet on the ground. Don't slouch. Don't cross your legs, because they can read that in a lot of different ways. But if you keep both feet on the ground, make eye contact, have a good handshake from the beginning, then they will read that as something very, very positive. I'm going to talk about one of my colleagues. Close the door. Okay. When I first met Dr. Wolf, I was a little miffed at the way that she greeted me, because what she did was she shook hands with me, but she shook hands with both hands. Okay. And of course, as a psychologist, I'm reading everything that's taking place. For one thing, she's taller than me. That was a little irritating. But then she grabbed both of my hands, or she grabbed my hand with both of her hands. Now that has a lot of meanings. One of them is intimacy. So was she trying to establish intimacy right away? Was this a trick that she was using? And the answer was, yeah, it was a trick that she was using. And I recognized that right away. And that really put me off. But of course we hired her anyway,
was it kind of like, when she did that, was it kind of like also she was saying, I'm this type of person?
I'm warm and affectionate. Maybe that's what she meant, but
Or maybe it was more like she was more feeling more dominant, I would take it as being more dominant,
Yeah, that's the way I took it too.
Yeah, like, here I am, and I'm the dominant one. so stay in the middle.
And one of the things that they talk about Donald Trump, one of the things that he does is when he shakes hands with people, he pulls them toward him. I don't know if you remember this.
My dad does that.
Yeah, and that's a sign of dominance. Of course, he's 6'4", whatever he is, but I mean, he grabs people's hands and pulls them forward, and then he'll grab their forearm, and that's all of those are signs of dominance. And of course, I don't know if he's still doing it. They made a big deal out of it right after he first became president, because he was doing that with the president of France and the prime minister of England and all of these things, and everybody's going, you can't do that. Wait a minute, you're supposed to be allies, you're supposed to be equals, and here you are, you're yanking everybody around.
Well, what about what Kim Jong-sil, what he is doing? The Olympics is going on there, and today he's having a big parade to show all his mass destruction weapons.
Kim Jong-un?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know how he shakes hands. I've never seen him shake hands.
But
He just kills people.
that's his dominance, But,
Right.
But he thinks of things in a different way, He has to be outrageous, or not
Right.
outrageous, respond in a big way.
Right.
And I wonder if Trump understands that, or if Americans understand that.
That's a good question. Saddam Hussein would do the same thing. He would have a sword and he'd be waving it around, or he'd be firing his AK-47 in the air, or he'd have a big parade and he'd have white horses and men with swords. All of these are symbols. They're all symbols of dominance, and a lot of it is just saber rattling, and that's a lot of what Kim Jong-un is doing. He's just rattling his saber. In order for him to be dominant in his country, he has to show dominance. He has to show aggressiveness, and of course, is Trump misreading his aggressiveness? Does he really want to attack the United States? Well, of course he doesn't. He'd get his butt kicked. He'd lose the whole peninsula. But he's just doing it to maintain control over his people. And he has to do that. Same way with Saddam Hussein. It was the only way you could keep control over Iraq. Remember, Saddam Hussein had overthrown someone else in order to take over. He was an army officer and he had overthrown somebody else. I can't even remember who he overthrew. But unless you maintain this aggressiveness, then people aren't going to read you as positive or read you as a leader. So you have to do things. You have to do these little things. And of course, Donald Trump has that. He yanks people when he shakes hands. The Canadian Prime Minister, evidently they had a tug of war going on between the two of them. Trump's trying to pull him and the Canadians pulling back. I mean, it was really kind of an interesting...
Did you know that the Canadian Prime Minister is like a supermodel?
Yeah.
To a lot of the females up there.
Oh, yeah.
And my sisters, they met him and they're just like head over heels in love with him, and he's not bad looking, and he really takes to the First Nation people, and he tries to help them and stuff, so.
His name's Trudeau, and he's the son or grandson. There was a Trudeau in politics up there before. He's French Canadian, so that kind of, the French Canadians have been the rejected people of Canada for an extended length of time, not counting the First Nation people who everybody tries to pretend don't exist up there. Yes, they do. Of course they do. Work done by Carvey, Cuddy, and Yap in 2010 showed that merely by standing in a high-power pose, an individual could raise their testosterone level and feel more confident. When we're talking about testosterone levels, we're not just talking about males. We're also talking about females. Remember, the female sex drive is due to testosterone in the hypothalamus. And if we can raise the testosterone level in the hypothalamus, whether you're male or whether you're female, it's going to make you feel more dominant. And of course, if we can put you in a high power pose, then potentially one of the things that will happen is that you will feel more dominant. You will feel your testosterone, as it were. These are two high power poses. So if you're sitting in your chair and you've got your hands back like this, it's showing that you're open. It's showing that you're dominant, that you don't care, that you're not afraid of the person that you're talking to. This is another one, and I do that all the time. I put my hand in my pocket. I do this one all the time. Not because I'm trying to show my dominance, it's because it's comfortable, I guess. But there are other high power poses. One of them is with your feet spread out and your hands on your hips. That's a high power pose as well. If everybody else is sitting and you're standing and you've got your hands on the table, that's a high power pose. So if you are interviewing with somebody, this is not a bad way to do things. It shows that you have a degree of dominance and that you're not subordinate, that you're willing to take charge of things. And of course, if that's the position you're looking for, then potentially that's going to work. Would this work with somebody like Donald Trump? He reads his stuff all the time. So would it work with Donald Trump? No, he doesn't want anybody to try to dominate him. He doesn't want anybody to even pretend that they're his equals. If you remember, he's really brilliant. I can't remember what else he said.
I got in trouble with that pose right there.
Which one? The one on the left?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Did somebody say you were trying to intimidate them?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was my first week on the work site.
This is what you should have done.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are low power poses. There's a lot of low power poses. If you're sure. There we go. We got Edison in the back with his arms crossed. Covering up your genitalia is a good way of. You're trying to protect yourself. That's actually.
That's a good way to probably sit there at an employee meeting, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, sit there with your arms crossed and they won't think anything negative
But
about you.
is it still like dominant though if you do something like that?
No,
Well, how do you sit in a meeting where
just like you're sitting right now.
stoic?
Yeah. And looking down so that you're, I did something wrong. I'll take everything.
Are they gonna bring my name up?
Yeah, please don't say it. Attribution theory, and this is one of the things that I was in a meeting yesterday, and I wasn't reacting to things, and everybody else is going, oh my God, that kind of stuff, and here I am just sitting there like I care. You know, we're talking about the budget. Like I have any control over this or even care about it. You know, this is really important to other people because they want this or they want that. I don't want anything. I just, I've got all the stuff that I need right here. I can, as long as I can teach, I'm fine. And I didn't care. And then everybody got all upset because here I am sitting there and I'm not reacting negatively to what's happening. I still don't care, despite the fact they wanted me to. We already talked about this stuff. Okay. Fundamental attribution there. Actually, I even showed you those same pictures. This is so bad. Okay. We talked about that stuff. Wait a
So I don't understand why people hate Trump. No, I was just kidding.
Okay.
I mean, being a Trump supporter and everything.
We take personal credit for all of our successes, of course. We blame our failures on someone else. We try to do that anyway. I was just blaming Edison for screwing up my lecture. I needed to blame somebody. He's sitting in the back of the room, so I might as well blame him. Unfortunately, sometimes we can't. Obviously, it was my stupid error. The other time that you can't blame somebody else is if you're in a singular sport, like tennis, where it's only you against the other guy. Who in the world are you going to blame if your serve's no good? Well, it must be somebody else's fault, can't possibly be mine. So one domain in which self-serving bias may be particularly common is in the world of sports. In order to get better, you need to identify what the problem is. And this is especially true with solo athletes, ones that, well, I used to be a runner. When you run, there's nothing you can do. It's you against them. It's you against everybody else. So it's a singular sport. And if you run a bad time, who are you going to blame? You can't blame the guy in front of you. You can't blame the guy behind you. You have to blame yourself. The problem is the entire weight of winning or losing is on your own shoulders. And of course, tennis is that way. Running is that way. To maintain their own egos, these individuals must find someone to blame for their failures. And this is one of the reasons why golfers, well, you know, Tiger Woods, all of a sudden Tiger Woods couldn't play golf anymore. Well, whose fault is it? Well, it must be his swinging coach, which sounds horrible, but the reality is that he had a coach that watched his swing and told him when he was doing something wrong. Tiger Woods, who else? You know, a basketball player, well, all of a sudden he can't hit a jump shot. You know, whose fault is it? Well, it must be the coach's fault. It can't possibly be my coach. He's not getting me open enough. So we all look for somebody else to blame. And of course, in basketball, if you're the star player, you can get rid of a coach. That's the way it worked with LeBron James. He was able to get rid of the coach because he was playing poorly. So, you know, he needed to blame somebody. Couldn't blame himself for not hitting that jump shot, so he blamed the coach. It's kind of a strange situation. So if you, a lot of times what happens with, especially with tennis players, as they're coming up, their coaches are their parents. Especially tends to be the father, but sometimes it's the mother. And a lot of times what will happen is as long as they're winning, everything's fine. The coach is wonderful. They're mostly coaching themselves anyway. As soon as they start losing, guess what happens next? Well, all of a sudden they have a breakup with their mother, their father, whoever's their coach, and now that guy's out, and now their parent is out, and they acquire a new coach. Being a coach is kind of in a professional setting like this is kind of a bad situation because, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with you. You can tell them the same thing every day, and as soon as they start playing badly, you're out.
Oh,
Boxers are the same way.
Figure skaters.
Exactly. Mike Tyson, you know, he lost. Well, his coach died. As soon as his coach died, all of a sudden he's raping somebody in Indianapolis. What the hell's going on here? You know, so whose fault was that? Well, obviously it was his coach's fault that he raped the young lady. He wasn't under control. I'm sorry?
I was like, it's his coach's fault for dying.
Yeah, well, it was his coach's fault for not controlling him. Yes, you're right. It was his coach's fault for dying. If he hadn't died, everything would have been fine. He'd probably still be the world champion. One form of defensive attribution is to believe that bad things happen only to bad people, or at least only to the people who make stupid mistakes or poor choices. Therefore, bad things won't happen to us because we won't be that stupid or that careless. Melvin Lerner called this the belief in a just world. In other words, the reason that I have money is because I deserve it, and the reason you don't have money is because you don't deserve it. If you deserved it, you'd have it. This is known as the just world phenomenon. The assumption is that people get what they deserve, and they deserve what they get. And there are a lot of people that believe these kinds of things, and these individuals would watch a certain news program because that news program is aimed toward that idea. So what news program am I talking about? Fox News, yeah. In Fox News, poor people are to blame for all their problems.
You know, my landlord sits there all day and she'll smoke like a whole pack of cigarettes. And she'll talk about how the Middle Eastern people, you know, they can just go and, you know,
and thumbs up, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thumbs up. And she just watches Fox all day, and then when I used to come home, she would like give me the whole spiel, you know, and so she kind of changed my political view, and if I don't understand what's going on with like politics, I'll call her and she'll give me her Fox. She's not a Republican or a Democrat, but she'll give me her Fox, whatever
Right.
spill, and tell me what a loser Clinton is,
Yeah.
and she's the Antichrist, and you know, so yeah, and she's really crazy. She would be awesome to bring as a speaker.
And she believes in the just world phenomena.
Yeah.
Because that's what they teach you on Fox News. There are good things about and bad things about just world beliefs. It helps people deal with feelings of vulnerability and mortality. In other words, why do I have money and you don't? I'm not going to worry about it because I deserved what I got and you deserve what you got, so I won't worry about it. I won't worry about you starving to death or not having any hay to feed your horses. I keep getting that one. Or your sheep. Evidently the sheep are all starving to death and everybody needs a bale of hay. So they come and borrow $12 from me. It costs $12 per bale of hay. Do you know that? $12 per bale of hay. Is that right?
Yeah. 14.
Oh no. Oh my God, I'm going to be lending out $14. Okay. And this is, this is good because we don't have to think about this. As long as we feel that we don't have to worry about the fact that we have money and somebody else doesn't have money, or something is good, something is bad. We don't have to worry about these things. But unfortunately, of course, it often leads to blaming the victim. So if we're looking at some 16-year-old was shot by the police a couple days ago, African-American gentleman in Chicago.
Oh, we were talking
He
about
was
that.
a 16-year-old. They thought he had a gun and they shot him. And
He was actually walking away. He had a knife and he had a mental disorder.
Oh, okay.
And so they quit with his mental help or whatever because of Medicaid and
Right.
everything. So anyway, all these cops knew him and they knew what kind of person he was
Right.
and his disorders. They shot him 16 times in the back. And then they didn't want to do anything about it at all.
Mhm.
They were just like trying to sweep it under the rug.
Sure.
They paid the parents $2 million, just for like a, stop with your charges.
Right.
And then next thing you know, if it wasn't for a journalist who kept pressing and pressing and pressing because they had the videos and
Right.
everything, if it wasn't for that journalist and trying to get those videos out there, that
Right.
guy would have walked free, but he got sentenced to first-degree murder.
Right.
Yeah.
16 times is a lot of times.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot of bullet holes. So sometimes we do blame the victim. And of course, we need to think about, I don't know what time it is. Okay. We need to think about these kinds of things. We need to think about, the Trump is pissed off because the NFL, of course, the NFL is over with. The Super Bowl was last weekend, so we don't have to worry about them not standing for the national anthem anymore. Well, what was it all about? Well, they were protesting the fact that the police were executing African American males. That's what they were pissed off about. That's why they were doing that. And of course, that's the dialogue that was theoretically should have happened. So do we worry about this stuff? I mean, now we're watching the news, trying to make sure that unarmed African American males aren't being shot in the streets anymore. Should we worry about this kind of stuff?
I think we need to worry about.
Or should we just assume that the police are always right? Should we blame the victim? It must have been the black guy's fault for walking away, I don't know, for whatever, for being black, I don't know, for being tall, for being African American, I don't know. But unfortunately, of course, there are other victims that it's not as easy to think about it negatively, like rape victims. My goodness, I mean, how in the world can you blame a rape victim? Well, the reality is, when we look at rape statistics and whatnot, a lot of times when they go to court, the defense attorney is trying to say negative things about them, and they have to defend themselves, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In essence, we're blaming the victim. Battered wives, of course. I mean, they could leave. Shouldn't they leave? I mean, they could just leave, can't they? And the answer is, of course, no. They may have learned helplessness and they just don't know what's going to happen next. Or they may have children, but they're afraid something negative will happen to their children. When we think of our own attributional biases and other people's biases, we feel we know, or do we know, that other people have more biases than we do. So if we're looking at prejudiced people, or other people are prejudiced, we know we're not prejudiced, but how about other people? So when we read other people, are we reading them more negatively than they actually are? That's really the question that we have to ask ourselves. And this is known as the bias blind spot. The idea that you assume that they're more biased than you are. The bias blind spot. Western culture is holistic and fosters holistic thinking about properties of objects, properties of people, individual autonomy, Judeo-Christian belief in an individual soul. All of these have to do with holistic thinking. They pay less attention to situation and context. When we analyze something, when we look at something, we look at it holistically. So if I'm thinking about Francis, I'm just thinking about Francis and I'm thinking about you holistically. I don't see you in the entire context of where you were born, where you've traveled, where you are right now. None of this is important to me. All that's important to me is you right here, right now. That's it. So I don't think of you in the total context of Francis McKay. Because I'm a Westerner. And that's the way we all think. That's the way we're taught. That's the way our textbooks are constructed. We think holistically rather than analytically. And that's because we are from the Western culture. The Eastern culture, on the other hand, fosters analytic thinking. Eastern thinking focuses on the object or the person and the surrounding context and relationships between them. Which makes it really interesting. So if we're talking about talking about a murder scene, they would just talk about the murder. But in the United States, we're trying to figure out why this guy killed this person. But as far as they're concerned, the important thing is the person's dead. As far as we're concerned, we want to know what this person was thinking, and that is more holistic. So what does that do? The difference is that they will accept. They look at murder differently than we do. We look at murder as there has to be a cause. There has to be an aberration. Something negative must have happened in order to cause this person to shoot somebody. But as far as they're concerned, that's not as important as the total context. It was in Saley, it was at the gas station. They're thinking of all these other, they're putting everything together, and we're just looking at the individual that did the murder. That is our context. We're trying to figure out why he did it. Why did he shoot that person? And they're thinking of the entire picture, and we're thinking of the entire person. So if the shooting in Las Vegas had taken place in India, they wouldn't even care about what was going on in this guy's mind. We need to know what happened, what this guy was thinking. Why did it happen? We need to stop it from happening again. We're looking at the individual, and we're seeking out why that individual did something. But in India, they wouldn't care about that. They wouldn't care about what was going on, whether he had a mental illness or whatever. They would be thinking, how can we increase security at a concert so this won't happen again? They're looking at they're analyzing the whole situation differently than we are. Okay. While members of individualistic cultures prefer dispositional attributions and think like personality psychologists, members of collectivistic cultures prefer situational explanations and think like social psychologists. They're thinking in a totally different context. We're thinking of the individual, and they're thinking with the group. They're thinking about the group. Greater situational focus is a matter of degree, of course, and it's the difference between us and them. One of the differences between us and them. We can, what time is it? Okay, as Americans, you know, and this has gotten us in trouble before because we fought against the Japanese during World War II, and we had a difficult time understanding what their strategies were. We didn't understand that the Japanese, as far as the Japanese are concerned, you attack somebody when they least expect it, and that's the way it's done, and that's a good thing. The Chinese think the same way. It's a collectivist way of thinking. We're Americans. We didn't understand that. So when they sent their peace envoys to Washington just before we got into World War II, this made perfect sense. The Japanese are going, why are they so stupid? What's wrong with the Americans? Why don't they understand that an attack is imminent? Obviously, you know, all these negative things have happened, and suddenly we're sending peace envoys. They must be the dumbest people in the world. That's what the Japanese thought. As far as they were concerned, it was obvious that we were going to attack them someplace. You know, it made perfect sense to them. So then, of course, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and we blamed the Japanese for this horrible thing that happened. And then we started fighting them in the South Pacific. And we would go on to an island, we would attack an island, and we would try to defeat their army. And we never knew what they were going to do. We had no clue what they were going to do. Well, this is military stuff. I mean, all this stuff makes... Everybody is supposed to do the same thing, but the Japanese did everything backwards. And they fooled us over and over and over again because we couldn't think like they did. It's because they're collectivistic. They think in analytic terms. They think in total context. They would have a bonsai attack, and we couldn't understand why they would do this, why they would sacrifice themselves. But of course, they were trying to reach an objective. They were looking at the whole picture. We're worried about, oh, that guy's been shot, and this guy's dead. Now we've got to take him back to the back. This guy is dead as well. The Japanese don't think like that. And for that reason, we had just a terrible time defeating them in the South Pacific because their way of thinking and their military strategy was completely alien to us. And of course, we're thinking like Westerners, we're thinking like Europeans, and it didn't make any sense. We had an easier time defeating the Germans in Europe than we did the Japanese in the South Pacific. We had the same problem with the Koreans in the Korean War and the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War because we didn't understand what was going on. We think like Americans. People are willing to sacrifice themselves. Life and death, you live for the collect. You live for the group, so you are willing to sacrifice yourself, and that didn't make any sense to us as Americans, as bizarre as that may seem. Self-serving bias more prevalent in Western and individualistic cultures than Eastern collectivistic cultures. Explanations of Olympic gold success. Reporters discuss success in terms of unique talent in the United States, but incorporated role of other people, the coach and the family. So if we talk to somebody from Japan who has won a gold medal, he doesn't talk about himself. He doesn't talk about how wonderful he is. He talks about how wonderful his coach is and how much support he got from his family. He looks at things from a more collectivistic point of view. But of course, as Westerners, we're bragging about ourselves, and I did it last week. My goodness, I was bragging about myself last week because I'm from here, from the United States. Failure make attributions to external causes in the United States, but internal causes in China. In other words, if somebody fails in China, it's because of a problem with them. It's not the total structure. It's not my coaches. It's not the fact I don't have the right equipment. In China, it's because of my internal failure. This is my problem. In the United States, if I fail, it's because Francis didn't give me enough support, and Edison's in the back booing me, and it's his fault, and it's your fault, but it's not my fault. It's always an external force in the United States. Self-critical attributions hold groups together in some Asian cultures, and that's one of the reasons why you have these, they'll have meetings and they'll talk about their personal failures. What they're trying to say is, I didn't support the group because of my own personal problems. And that's what happens in Asian countries. But in the United States, of course, we would never do that. We would never say it's, I failed you and therefore, the group has failed. That we would never say something like that. What would we do? What happens at this institution when something bad happens? They fire the president. They get rid of the board. They're looking for somebody to blame. Right? Okay. And that's what was happening in the meeting yesterday. Oh my God, we don't have as much money as we want. It must be somebody else's fault. Let's fire the president. The faculty association, every time the faculty feels like they're not being appreciated, what do? They try to get rid of the deans. They try to get rid of the provost. As stupid as that sounds. It doesn't make any sense. We're always trying to blame somebody else. Belief in a just world, more prevalent in cultures with extreme differences in wealth, of course, so it's, we're talking about the Western world. If we have very, very wealthy people, why do they get more money? They get money and I don't have any? Is this not right? No, it's Western cultures. So the more differences between the poor people and the wealthy people, the more likely you're going to hear the just world justification of the fact that I've got money and you don't have any money. This happened last week. I told you about the two brothers. One of the brothers is a veterinarian. This guy, and he was, so what is he telling me? He's telling me how much money he makes a year. Why would you tell me that you make $750,000 a year? I make $750,000 a year. I'm doing $750,000 worth of business every year. Why would he tell me this? Should I care? Did I tell him how much I made? The reason he told me was because his brother owns one of the largest farms in the world. And his brother's a multimillionaire. He owns like, I don't know, a couple thousand acres in Indiana, and the farmland in Indiana is worth a lot of money. He also owns huge tracts of farmland in Brazil, as odd as that seems. So he's one of the richest farmers in the world. And so his brother, in order to compete with that, needed to tell me that he makes $750,000 a year. Of course, he works his tail off. And I work my tail off, but I make whatever I make, and I don't really care. I married a rich woman, so I don't care. She's not really rich. I'm kidding. She doesn't have that much money. She's a retired Air Force colonel, so she makes that much money. All right, so I screwed up, and I talked about, in my chapter 3 was from another textbook, and I made a mistake. I apologize. So I'm going to try to cover all the material I missed in the other chapter 3.
I noticed that I was all looking for the PowerPoint, and I was just sitting here like, oh, okay. I was going to read that out.
You didn't tell me. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry.
What a pal. Okay, I'll remember this. I think you didn't get an A for that. Okay, let me see how much time do I have? I've got 13 minutes. Okay, let me see how much of this I can cover. Because this is the 4th week and I just finished the 4th week, so yeah, I'm right there. Wait a minute, that's not good, is it?
That's the test, isn't it?
I gotta be careful. I'm sorry?
That's the test. It's on chapters 1 through 4.
Is it?
Or 3.
I don't remember.
Are we gonna
1 through
talk
4.
about, narcissistic?
Narcissistic? Narcissism? Not yet.
Oh,
Okay, is that supposed to be in this chapter?
okay. I hope
Is there a
so.
question about it on the test?
I don't think so.
Is narcissism already? Well, let's see what I didn't cover. 2 kinds of social cognition. We're talking about social cognition and how we get along in society, how we think about other people. Some of our thinking is what we refer to as automatic thinking. It's quick. It's we don't even deliberate about anything. We're making assumptions. We're using our perceptions. It's very quick. It's very rapid. We don't analyze. It's just automatic thinking. And we have to do this. We have to do this in order to survive. Because anytime you go into a room, you're looking around. What if there's somebody that's dangerous? in that room. Or maybe you have an enemy that wants to hurt you. I have an enemy. I was worried about, well, I wasn't really worried about it, but he told me that if I ever came back to Indiana, he was going to shoot me with a hunting rifle, which always makes a big hole in people. Anyway, evidently, obviously, he wasn't there. Bobby Huffman is the guy's name. But anytime you go into a room, of course, you look around just to see if there's any danger. If you're female, you really need to do this. You need to look, make sure that there's not danger in a room. You know, females aren't as big as males sometimes, most of them. Anyway, and there could be somebody dangerous in the room that might try to hurt you or attack you. You know, this is always a possibility. So we do this all the time. We go into a room and we actually will scan the room. Even if we're not looking around, we're scanning the room with our peripheral vision, trying to determine if there's a group of individuals over there that might potentially want to hurt us. That sounds paranoid, doesn't it? But the reality is we do this. I hope we do this.
We do it, but every situation is different, and people around you, they watch how you handle the situation. And if you're not trained to fully deal with every situation, and the people that you call upon that aren't fully trained, and you're not very clear on the, you know, what you're supposed to do to unravel the situation, then you have all this gossip about how you handle the situation. And so with automatic thinking, you know, you also you really have to think about automatic training too, and how to speak.
Potentially, you're absolutely correct. So if you came into this room and there were, you know, 3 guys that you'd never seen before that are relatively big, what would you do? Well, you'd probably go get close to somebody that potentially could protect you, and actually that would be anybody, because numbers, of course, will protect you. So you'd go get close to Edison, get close to Francis, you get close to Kiana, and you know, numbers are good. Numbers are always good. So you'd go over and you'd be really friendly to Francis today, even though you don't really like him very much, and you don't really want to talk to him hardly ever. But today, you're my best buddy, okay? Because you're going to protect me. And we do these kinds of things. We do these kinds of things, and that's automatic thinking. We do it automatically, and we do it for our own protection. Control thinking, of course, you're thinking about what's going on. It's effortful, it's deliberate, it's thinking about self and the environment, carefully selecting the right course of action, of course, but you're more careful about this. It's more conscious. Everything else is or the other thinking, of course, is automatic. People will often react correctly despite not consciously choosing to react in that manner. We do this with schemas. We create these schemas. These are mental templates used to make decisions. And we will create these schemas as to, well, what's the best place to go eat in Albuquerque? Well, there is no good place to eat in Albuquerque. So if you're going to eat, you better eat at the Laguna Burger, and I don't know, you go over the hill and it's down at the bottom of the hill right there, Route 66. That's the best place to eat, because you've eaten there before and it didn't poison you. But you know, every time I eat in Albuquerque, I get sick. So I don't eat in Albuquerque. I eat at the Laguna Burger, and those guys are really funny and they're really nice. And them Laguna guys are really nice people. The emotional reactions, going with your gut feelings, you know, when we do these kinds of things, we may recognize expertise, unconscious understanding that guides our answers. We do have expertise. I have expertise that I don't even know about, and we all do. We all understand things. We've all been in situations where we where it was potentially dangerous. How did we get out of that situation? Well, you know, this is our expertise. This is us using our expertise. It may mean never being in the corner. It may mean always facing the door, so you know where your escape route is. I'm sounding really paranoid. But the reality is we do this all the time. And we need to do this. We need to protect ourselves. If you don't protect yourself, 99 times out of 100 there's going to be no problem in it, but it's that one time that you're going to mess up, that things are going to mess up. Implicit knowledge is knowledge and understanding that we are not aware of consciously. And we do have knowledge that we don't, you know, it's something that we read. You know, something happened. Implicit knowledge. Blind sight is perception that is not recorded consciously. Sometimes we do see things. It registers in our mind, but it doesn't register with us consciously. It's unconsciously. So, and this is known as blind sight. Now the problem, and we know that this exists because sometimes you will be wandering around and all of a sudden you feel deja vu. I understand this. I've seen this before. Well, the reality is it was probably blind sight. You saw it before, but it didn't register with you. It's not registered with you consciously, but it's registered with you subconsciously or unconsciously. It's in there. It's in your brain. It's happened. You've seen it before, and maybe it scared you and you didn't have to react to it, but it's blind sight. You will remember this stuff. Prosopagnosia is really kind of fascinating. If somebody has brain damage, a lot of times they won't recognize people with Alzheimer's disease. So if they don't recognize their children, or they don't recognize their nephews or whatever. But if we put a heart monitor on these individuals, any time they see a face that was familiar to them before they developed Alzheimer's disease, their heart rate will actually increase. So if you have a significant other, a spouse or a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, if you have a significant other, just think about every time you see them, you automatically smile. You can't control yourself. Your mouth forms a smile, right? Isn't that what happens? I know, my wife comes into the room and I just, if my wife came in right now, I couldn't control myself, right? And you're the same way, right?
Yeah, I went around.
And you can't control yourself. It's automatic. It's just the way it works. And that's kind of prosopagnosia. That's the same way with these select individuals. Despite the fact that you don't recognize them consciously, subconsciously you do. And of course your heart rate will increase. Intuition is recognizing someone you know in a younger face of the individual. And this was really kind of tough because I saw somebody that I hadn't seen in over 50 years last weekend. It was an individual. And we weren't really very good friends, but he was sitting right beside me. Oh, that's really nice. They put somebody I don't really know very well. And here I am. I can talk to just about anybody. But here's a guy I haven't talked to in 50 years. I have no clue what's going on. And of course, he introduced himself, and I said, yeah, I recognized you, Jeff. I recognized you. And what I needed to do was, in my brain, I needed to take the picture of 18-year-old Jeff, and I needed to age it until it was 68 years old. That's what I needed to do in my brain. And that's what I did. And I actually recognized this guy. Subliminal, and this is very controversial, especially Sarah doesn't believe in subliminal. She doesn't think it really exists. So we had this huge argument when I first got here about subliminal. It doesn't matter. So you can believe it, not believe it, it's not really important. Once upon a time, they swore by subliminal messaging, and then they stopped, and now they think they've done research that shows that it only works in certain circumstances. When I was in the military, I know we were using subliminal messages. Not important, not really important. It's not worth an argument, okay? I've already had that argument, so. But it's reacting to stimulus that's below your threshold of recognition. And I'm not going to show any subliminal stuff. Does anybody recognize this guy? JFK. John F. Kennedy.
Looks like mad.
Yeah. John F. Kennedy. How about these two young pups?
That's you.
Bruce Bradley. Oh. Is
Bill
it?
Clinton and
Oh, Hillary
his wife.
Yeah, Bill and Hillary. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I know, Bill and Hillary. That's kind of cool. How about this young Yaley?
Mr. Bush.
Bush.
Mr. Bush.
Yeah, George W. There you go. How about this guy? Does anybody recognize this guy?
Hugh Hefner. That's the
Reagan.
way.
Ronald Reagan? Well, he's a lot better looking than that. I don't think his ears were that big.
Is it true your ears grow?
Oh, yeah,
older
they
you
keep
get?
growing.
Just keep growing. and
So does your
growing?
nose, yeah.
Really? My grandpa's ears were like this big until he passed away.
They never stop growing. Anybody recognize him?
No.
It's Pope Francis.
Oh.
Okay, I know. See, that's Pope Francis. See, we keep seeing pictures of him smiling, you know, and we never saw any other popes smiling, so. I'm not Catholic, but if I were, you know, I'd love this guy. I love this guy anyway, and I'm not even Catholic. How about this guy? JD?
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp. Now, I don't, see, yeah, it's Captain Jack Sparrow is who it is. I don't even recognize. I don't know. How did you know it was Johnny Depp?
The lips.
The lips?
Yeah.
Okay, his lips are special. Okay. All right. Schemas are organized.
Kilmer.
I'm sorry?
I say he kind of resembles Val Kilmer.
Yeah.
See?
But everybody got him. I mean, did you know that it was Johnny Depp? Did you think it was Val Kilmer?
I thought it was Val Kilmer.
Okay.
Do you know Val Kilmer is like a really big butthead?
I knew that he was really fat now. He's gained a lot of weight.
One year we went to AHEC and he came into the place where we were doing the AHEC competitions, and all the colleges, of course all the college people wanted to go and take a picture with him.
Oh, sure.
Well, and he was like, okay, you know, and then towards the end he would start getting mad, you know, I gotta go. Even though he got honored with the Star Quilt and all this stuff, you know, and Dene College was the last people to get up there, you know, and so I got a picture of him.
Being mean, being
Well,
grouchy.
with all of Dene College, yeah. And here's me and my friend, we're just like cheesy from ear to ear, and he's just standing there all pissed off looking. You know, it's crazy.
That sounds like a great picture. Okay, we're going to stop right here and we'll pick this up next time. I'll figure out what I missed. Some of the stuff, I apologize. Like I said, it's Edison's fault. He's in the back of the room. Anyway, I'll figure it out. But we're on chapter 4, and this was week 4, so next week we'll get to chapter 5. I don't know where the test is, but I'll figure it out, and I'll tell you next week. You can take the test anytime you want. It's online, so yeah, you guys are good to go. If you don't do it until the end of the semester, I won't be happy, but you can do it whenever the hell you want to do it. That's okay. That's fine.
At least Blackboard gets to grade for you.
I'm sorry?
At least Blackboard gets to grade for you.
Yes, that's perfect. You know, I don't even have to worry about it. And that's the reason I do the multiple choice. You either know the answer or you don't know the answer. Okay, it's good for me. It may not be the best way to test somebody, but by golly, it's the easiest way to grade. And I'm lazy. And I'm terrible. You know, I'd give you guys all A's if they'd let me, but they won't. So I have to do something to figure out who you are. Okay, I'll see you guys next week. As much fun as we've been having. Tuesday, I'll see you on Tuesday.
You know what, I think that picture was so horrible, I didn't even save it.
Oh, is that right? It's gone now. I was so looking forward to seeing Val Kilmer. Was it because of the movie he made, Braveheart? Wasn't that the name of it? No, that wasn't it.
Thunderheart?
Thunderheart, that's it.
I think the last movie I seen him was Kill the Irishman.
Oh, right here.
You got it?
Look, come here. Oh my God, this is like so bad. Okay. So there he is.
Oh my God, he is pissed.
Yeah, and then there's me and my friend, and we're just like so happy.
Oh yeah.
And he's just like, hurry
What year is this?
up. 11.
He's fat. It's fat Val. Not skinny Val.
He can't fit in the backseat, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I like it. Could you email me that pic? Can I use that?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
sure.
cool. Oh, that's perfect. Val Kilmer, the grouchy man. Oh no, I forgot.